So thank you everyone for joining. My name is Nalini Gulsaran. I'll be your lecturer tonight. Today we're going to be talking about website essentials and what you need before you get started. We're going to take really a high-level introductory look at websites and budget considerations, terminology, things that you kind of need to know. We'll also cover some of the variations in the different platforms. I often get questions around, what do I pick? Do I pick WordPress? Do I pick Wix? Do I pick Squarespace? And so I'm going to cover some of the basics around those and pros and cons, and to kind of give you an idea so maybe you can help decide for yourself. A little bit about myself. As I mentioned, my name is Nalini Gulsaran. I am the founder of Edge Space Marketing. It's a digital marketing agency here in Stanford. I do web development, search engine optimization, and social media management for small businesses, nonprofits, startups, and entrepreneurs. It's really an entry-level point for a lot of businesses that are oftentimes neglected by the bigger companies. So I'm here to work with the community. All right, so I'm gonna go right ahead and jump in. Feel free to utilize the chat box as much as possible and stop me as we go. When I go into presentation modes, it does get a little weird, so I may have to catch the questions at the end, but I'll do my best to stay on top of that. All right, so give me 1 minute to get the presentation started and we'll jump right in. Okay, here we go. So a few things we're going to cover today. We're going to talk about, as I mentioned before, very high level things you need to know about web development. So we're going to talk about the components you need and why you need them. We're going to talk about what the meaning of a domain name is, URL, hosting, SSL certificates. These are things you're going to hear very commonly. Uh-oh. All right, there was an echo, sorry guys. These are things and terminologies you're going to hear very commonly used throughout your web building process, especially if you're calling web designers or GoDaddy or even just looking at their websites and you're not sure what those things mean. We're going to talk about the different web hosting options, Wix, Squarespace, and WordPress, so we could talk about what that means and how they look. And then we'll talk briefly about how much you should budget. This is a big one because depending on what you pick, your budget could be anywhere from a couple $100s to $500, $600, $700 just for the basic options, depending on what you decide. And then lastly, I'm going to talk a little bit about the key components every website should have. And that's stuff we're talking about on page, features, functionalities that every successful website should have at some point. So here we're looking at a bunch of different websites that are all built on different platforms. Some of these are Wix, some of these are WordPress. Now they're all very skinny and tall because I was trying to give you a look and feel as you can customize them as much as you want, whatever feature, colors that suit your liking. For many of you that have built websites, these are all websites that we're looking at for businesses. Nonprofits use them often too, whether it's Wix, WordPress, or Squarespace. And we can talk about how you can get those different functionalities. So let's talk about those components and jargon. The first thing to really think about with a website is that if you use the analogy, a website is like a house, a lot of it starts to make a little bit more sense. So here's a good graphic describing how your website could look like a house. So the first part about it is that your website, basically the house, is where your information is stored. This includes the pages and the images. When you think about the domain name, or also known as a URL, this is where people find you. It's your address. So it's the mailing address. So in this case, it's your physical address for your website. Hosting. Hosting is a big one that people don't always understand because you think, I have a website, why do I need hosting? Hosting is where your website lives. So in the analogy of a house, it's the land. It's the plot of land that the house lives on. So your website has to physically live somewhere. Those pages, those images need a physical place to live, and that's where your hosting is. And then lastly, the internet. The internet is the street. It's how people get there, www. Google search, your phone, Siri, that's how they find you. So let's talk a little bit more about terms and definitions, because these are all things you're going to need to know as you get into your building process. You've got a domain name or URL, and a domain or URL is basically your website address. It usually begins with HTTP, which is called, it's, I spelled it out here, Hypertext Transfer Protocol. And like we mentioned earlier, you want to consider this the home address, what people are going to put in their GPS, but it's really what you're putting in your browser, what you're putting in your phone to find the address. I want to also mention, while it says HTTP here, it can also say HTTPS, and that S is very important. That means that the website is secured. So if you're going to buy something online, you look for that S. Nowadays, Google is demanding that all websites have it, and we're going to talk a little bit about that in a little bit and why you need that. But just keep that in the back of your mind. And here we're going to talk about it right now. So here's your SSL certificate. It's the prefix, right? It has an S on the end, and it's telling from one computer to another computer that the connection is encrypted. It's a safe connection. You can purchase something online. You can submit private data. The other side of this, though, is that Google is now requiring that all websites have the HTTPS configured, your SSL certificate. And you might think that that's not a big deal. The problem is that on some browsers, you're going to get a warning message. And if you don't know how to get through the advanced features to get to the website, you might get complaints from people that they cannot get to your website. So it's now become part of your packages when you're looking for hosting, that you see if you can get an SSL certificate as part of it. So your hosting provider. So your website is basically made up of files and folders, and your hosting provider is basically giving you a digital space to store those things so that people can get to them, so that you can actually have a website. Like I mentioned with your house, the stuff inside your house, the walls of your house, they're all inside of your house, but they're somewhere on the plot of land. When you're working with a web developer, and sometimes if you call GoDaddy, there was a gentleman earlier that mentioned he's using WordPress. It's very common to hear the phrase front end and back end. So the front end of your website is what appears to users, is what we see. It's the public version of your website. It's where you will start to see the things like the text, the font, the boxes, how you've laid it all out. Oftentimes people refer to this as the user interface. On the flip side of that, you have the back end. And the back end is really hidden from the users. Only folks with administrative access, or if you set up somebody as a contributor, will have access to your website, and they will have access to the back end where you're doing all your designing and your building. It might be where you're experimenting and building pages that you might not show to the public because you're trying to figure out how that all works. And so that's your back end of your website. Any questions so far? Just checking the chat box really quick, and so far nothing. So feel free to use the chat box liberally. So let's talk more about those hosting options. What does that really mean? What are your platforms? So one of the most common platforms, we see advertise them all the time. I see them on YouTube. I don't know about you, but Wix. Wix has become very, very popular. They were recently in the news for being one of the biggest web development platforms out there right now. And that's because Wix allows you to have a drag and drop interface. You personalize your website with ease. You don't need to know any bit of coding. And it's great for beginners who want full creative control. You'll find that more graphic designers, folks with graphic designer backgrounds, prefer the Wix interface. I'm a coder by nature, and while I don't code in WordPress, I prefer WordPress because it gives me much more flexibility around functionality, whereas Wix has more of a graphic design interface where you layer things and you're nudging them, and if that's your look and feel, this will be a great option for you. One other thing about Wix before we go into Squarespace is that everything is, when you think of Wix as your hosting and your website are one and the same. That's very important because you don't have a split cost for that. Whereas when you get into WordPress, there's going to be a split cost. But for Wix and Squarespace, the hosting and the website are in the same cost. So let's talk a little bit more about Squarespace. Squarespace is a really, really good platform for design. It has pre-designed themes, and it gives you a little bit more comfort that you can't mess it up. The thing with Squarespace is that they give you very strict templates to follow. You can only put images a certain way. You can use text a certain way. And this is great because at the end of the day, you cannot have an ugly website. The thing with Wix is that if you're not sure how to lay things out, and it gives you so much creative control, you can end up with what's essentially a not pleasant looking website. Too many elements, too many colors, overlapping, things aren't in the right place. Because you have freedom of control, you can basically put them anywhere and you might not realize that. With Squarespace, because you have a little less freedom of control, you still have creative license, but you can't put them any and everywhere. It prevents you from, quote unquote, messing up the design. So just keep that in mind with Squarespace. If you think of Wix as full creative control, Squarespace is medium creative control. And what ends up happening is, let's say that you wanted an e-commerce website. You would build the pre-designed theme, but if you wanted to further customize it, then you're going to get into custom coding on top of it to make it really do what you want. And so that's something you want to keep in mind if you have a very specific look and feel that you want for your website and Squarespace isn't already doing it. And as I mentioned with Wix, with Squarespace, the hosting and the website are one and the same. So your Squarespace website and your Squarespace hosting is the same cost. You're not adding any additional cost. There's no split cost there. Okay. Let's talk about WordPress. So WordPress, it's great because it's actually really good for beginners all the way to expert users, and expert being advanced features and functionality. It is particularly great for tech savvy folks like myself who are former coders and IT people. We kind of like the freedom more than the controlled interfaces of Wix and Squarespace. WordPress, if you get hosting, if you get web hosting, which we'll talk about in a little bit, is much more cost effective. And when we get into the cost analysis, you'll see that. Wix can cost you, I'll just off the top of my head, Wix can cost maybe $11 a month. Squarespace can cost you $7 a month. WordPress can cost you as little as $2.95 a month. So those are some of the reasons people end up with WordPress. It's because of the cost factor. But again, if you're not as tech savvy, you might be more comfortable with the other platforms. With WordPress, you do have technically a split cost. You have your hosting and you have your WordPress, but if you go through the right provider, they're going to be together. There's a question in the chat box. Let's grab that question. Yep, and it's gone up to $4 a month now. Thank you, Scott. That's the WordPress hosting costs. And then lastly, it can take you a little bit longer to get kind of a grips on how WordPress works as a content management system. It's not just a website builder with a drag and drop interface. There are quite a few plugins that allow that. And so what I do when I build WordPress websites is that I use Elementor, a drag and drop plugin. So basically you install your plugin and then it allows me to create that drag and drop interface similar to Wix and Squarespace so that I'm not coding. I'm actually with WordPress, I actually write no code because I'm using just the right amount of plugins. WordPress was originally designed to be a blog platform. However, most themes, you can turn that off and create static websites, which is why it's become one of the most common used platforms. So let's talk a little bit. I'm going to show you how some of the pre-built templates and stuff work. So here is Wix that is showing you how the pre-built templates work. You basically can go through a list, you answer questions, and you can actually pick a template that's built just for your business. When I first built my website, I built it on Wix because it was super easy. And when I show you in a little bit, they have something called the artificial design interface. I literally answered maybe 4 questions. It built the template. It gave me content. It provided photos. I didn't have to do a lot of thinking. I suddenly had a website that did everything I needed it to do. 3 years later, I realized I want to write my own content, and I've now rebuilt it on WordPress. But I literally built the website in an hour, beginning to end, and that was clicking through a bunch of buttons. So the ADI has become very friendly for that. The downside with the ADI is that it's pre-configured in such a way that once you see one, you will be able to recognize it over and over again because it has a very square, boxy look, and every website built with the ADI looks almost the same. And that's one thing I didn't like about it. As much as I tried to customize it, it wasn't working the way I wanted it to. There's a question in the chat box. It says, are any of these questions better for transaction processing or e-commerce, as I mentioned? So they all do e-commerce. They all have transaction processing. Wix, if I had to kind of put them in a hierarchy, I would say for ease, Wix, then Squarespace, then WordPress. WordPress requires a lot more configuration and customization, but it is a lot more, like I mentioned, it's a lot cheaper. So a lot of people are on WordPress using the WooCommerce plugin. Squarespace, you can do it on Squarespace. I know quite a few people who do. However, as I mentioned before, you need some of that custom coding to get the look and feel just right. Wix is actually pretty straightforward for inventory management straight through to transaction processing, but it is quite expensive. So something to keep in mind is that if you are going to build an e-commerce website, and if you're going to pay that much for Wix, you're almost better off going straight to Shopify. And Shopify is built to be an e-commerce website. And so it has a lot more built-in functionalities that it's meant just for e-commerce. So my recommendation is always, you can look them up and weigh them out. It all depends on what you're looking for. And I find most people end up on Shopify at the end of the day. So as we talk about the pre-built templates, here's the next look at it. So once you have picked your template, then you can start adding in elements to your website. So here you can see from the list, text, and the list keeps going all the way down to video and grids and other things for your Wix website. And the artificial design interface, here's a little jiffy showing you how it works. You literally click create a new site, and then from the list, you can actually pick your business. It's flipping really fast, apologies, but it's as simple as I want to build a website. Here's the type of website I want to build. And as I mentioned, it gives you all of the coding plus language and a full template. Here is it in action. So here you actually have, this is like the header section, and you can pick the actual design. So you don't actually have to lay out any of the elements. The elements get laid out. You just put in the content and then pick from the pre-configured design in the panels at the left. I have found customers and clients to be a little frustrated by this method simply because it doesn't give you as much flexibility. So for example, in this next image, see how they're sizing this image of this young lady. It's that in this example you can, but in other places, depending on the size of your image and the way that ADI laid out the picture, you kind of get stuck with the image the way it is, or you can only crop it a certain way. And so the other downside is you might be stuck with the photo just being in that little circle as opposed to being a full header image like you want. So those are some of the challenges depending on the ratios of your pictures. I tend to find most folks who use the ADI, a lot of their frustrations come with the photo layout. And honestly, with Squarespace, it's the same feedback I've gotten. It's the limitability around how you lay out photos. Can you use your own photos on Wix? Question from the chat. The answer is yes. You can upload them right to the Wix interface and you can use them. The only thing is that if you uploaded a photo to Wix and then later you needed it to do something again, it can be a little challenging to download it. So just keep that in mind. You can get to it. Just takes a few more steps to get to it, but you can absolutely use your own photos. I have a Adobe stock license, so I actually license photos and use them on the website rather than using the Wix stock images. Sometimes they're just not exactly what we're looking for. So Squarespace. So here you can see Squarespace. Here's the difference in how the interface looks in Squarespace. Squarespace actually has a backend. So I'm going to go back a little bit just to show you. On the left side of the screen over here, if you can see my mouse moving where it says section design, that's technically your back end, and you're building on what looks like your front end. So you can still see everything which is over on the right. So you see what your website's gonna look like in Wix. When you go into Squarespace, you actually have the same concept. You've got on the left what your back end looks like, where you're picking different elements and such. And then on the right side is where you'll actually see where, excuse me, elements are on your page. In this image example, you're picking the template. And as I mentioned before, with Wix, you don't have to use a template. With Squarespace, you're better off using a template because it's a lot harder to build and customize it the way you want. So here you can see adding in elements are, you can click create a page, you can create portfolios and folders. This gets a little complicated as how things start to nest the navigation side of their backend. I have had clients that have set it all up, time's gone by, and now they don't remember what things are. And so sometimes we take a little bit of time just to decipher it. So that's where Squarespace can become a little unwieldy just because the navigation can be a little confusing if you did custom coding and stuff like that. And here you can see a little further down, as you continue to go down your build process, you can put in text, markdown, and you'll notice that the content blocks look a lot different than Wix. They're just simpler, black and white. You just need to know what they are. Whereas in Wix, you actually see a visual representation of what your content block looks like. You see it as an example form. So let's talk a little bit about WordPress. So with WordPress, this is your back end. And as I mentioned before, this looks a whole lot different than WordPress or Squarespace, where you can actually see your front end simultaneously. We'll get to, in a few slides, you'll actually see how you get to your front end. So if you use a traditional WordPress method, which is, this is how you get to a page, you put content in the blocks, and that's kind of how it works, right? They've changed the editor, so there's a new Gutenberg editor, so you actually create blocks. They've tried to make it a little bit more like Squarespace in that sense. I tend to not use it. I like the classic editor simply because I switched to Elementor. So Elementor has a free version and it has a paid version. And so on the right side where you see the number 1, this is actually showing you what your front end would look like. And number 2 over here on the left is where you actually add your elements in. And then down at the bottom where the number 3 is, if you can see that, is where you update the page. So this is how you take WordPress and you take it from a confusing, complicated builder to a drag and drop editor where you can drop blocks in, you create rows, you can do, if you get really savvy with it, you could do a lot with it. And again, this is just the free version, what you're seeing on the screen. There is a pro paid version, which as a builder and a developer, I have, but you may not need it. It may bring you extra functionality for your website if you want to carry the cost, but it's absolutely not necessary. The free version is pretty powerful on its own. So here is it basically in action. You're clicking elements from the left side of the screen, you drag it to the right side of the screen, and that's how you get the elements on page, and then you can drag them and move them around. If I actually did a full Elementor class, we can talk a lot about how to actually edit all of these elements. It can get pretty complicated once you get into it, but it's pretty straightforward. And to answer the earlier question, again, though, around using your own photos, similar with WordPress, Wix, and Squarespace, all of them you can upload your own photos, whereas Wix has another benefit for Wix. Wix has its own stock database you can use. Squarespace and WordPress, you have to get your stock images from a free website like Pixabay or Pexels, or in my case, I carry a license to Adobe Stock. You can use iStock, and as long as you have license to use the photos, you can. A cautionary tale for any of you with photos on your website: if you don't have them licensed, meaning you bought the license for it through a licensed site, or you got it from a royalty-free website, be very careful about using it on your website, particularly if it has a brand or if it has someone's face on it. You may owe them royalties down the line if you don't have permission to use that photo. So just be very careful about downloading things arbitrarily from the internet unless it comes from a royalty-free website or it's coming from a licensed website where you've actually licensed it, or somebody's licensed it on your behalf and you have permission to use it. That can become very dicey later on if you don't have those permissions. And so the important question that's on a lot of people's minds often is, what are my budget considerations? How much money should I really budget for building a website? So here you have a few different elements that you need to think about. As I mentioned before, your cost can vary. The range is really wide. Your domain name alone can start at $199 a year to thousands of dollars a year. If you think of, this is gonna be a bad analogy, but if you think of domain names, the cost of domain names as like the price of fish at the market, or even when you go to a restaurant, it's called market value, right? The fair market value or market rate for that fish. It's the same thing for the domain. If you're trying to pick a domain that's very, very popular, GoDaddy and different providers have algorithms that figure out how many people want this domain, why they want it, when they want it. I couldn't tell you what goes into that, but they have their own ways of getting that done. And as a result, your domain price goes up. So to tell a personal story on this, when I was naming my business, one of the things they tell you to do is Google the domain that you want. Make sure no one's using it. Make sure that it doesn't lead to a conflicting business or a conflicting type of business. Like for example, if you're a teacher, you may not want it being linked to adult entertainment. That can happen because anybody can name their businesses anything. And if you name something diamond something or the other, that same diamond something or the other could be linked to another business that you may not want popping up when people are searching for you. So those are some of the things you look for. When I looked for edge space marketing, there were no competing businesses using the same name. The domain was readily available, but I wasn't quite sure if that day and time that's what I was going to name my business. A week later, I go to buy the domain through HostGator or GoDaddy, and someone bought it because a bot figured out that I wanted it, and the bot tried to sell it back to me for $1,000. I didn't buy it. In the end, I ended up with EdgeSpace MKTG because that one was $199 a year as opposed to $1,000. Here's the downside though. As your business grows and more people go to your website and your domain grows in popularity, my domain went from $199 the first year. I now pay $19.99 for renewal. And then when I transferred the domain, I paid another $25 because of increasing popularity, because of more and more people are going to my website. So as you grow your business and your domain becomes more popular because your website's popular, that cost will increase. It's not fixed. So just always have that in the back of your mind that your domain price may go up, and then that's where you have to start working around moving it from one host to the other and all of that. The next option that you have to keep in mind for budget is your SSL certificate. The SSL certificate is what you do to secure your website. As I mentioned, we have a question on that in the chat too. Is the SSL certificate simple to ask for from your web host if you already have a site set up and it doesn't have the certificate and it has the insecure message? Yes, the answer is yes. If you call your hosting provider and you tell them you want an SSL certificate, you'd be surprised. You may already be paying for one as part of your hosting plan, depending on who you're with, and they just need to configure it. Other times they'll tell you need to buy one. And then after you buy it, you could even ask them to configure it for you. So I've known that I've had success with GoDaddy and HostGator and Network Solutions as providers who've configured the SSL certificate for the clients themselves. So Elizabeth, if you need an SSL, call your provider and they will get it for you, and then they can probably configure it for you without you having to call a developer. And that cost can be anywhere from $50 to $100 per year. Right now, GoDaddy is selling SSL certificates for $78, I believe was the price I saw about 3 weeks ago. And these prices are fluid. So while it was $78 3 weeks ago, it could go up. So that's why the range is 50 to 100. Depends on what deals they have. It depends on coupons, things like that. When we talk about hosting, this is where it gets really confusing and sometimes complicated for some people. So let me try my best to break it down. And again, throw your questions in the chat. So first part of the hosting is if you wanted to do WordPress hosting. I've listed it from kind of the cheapest to the most expensive. So if you started with hosting for WordPress, what you want to do is you want to get web hosting from a third-party provider such as GoDaddy, HostGator, Bluehost, Network Solutions. Those are some of the top 4 that people use. SiteGround is another one that I have clients using. And they range from $2.99 a month to $8.99 a month. And as someone mentioned earlier in the chat, the lowest rate he saw was $4. So it does vary, but you want to pay attention to 2 things. You want to make sure your SSL certificate is included for the first year. And for some of them, your domain may be included for the first year. So that could significantly cut down your first year in business cost if those things are included. For example, GoDaddy does not. No matter which hosting plan you get, GoDaddy does not include the SSL certificate. So you would always have to pay for that separately on top of your hosting. They're also the most expensive right now in this range. GoDaddy is at the $8.99 end of the range, and HostGator is at the other end, Bluehost somewhere in the middle. So those are a couple things to keep in mind. The reason I'm saying to go get web hosting from one of these third-party provider and not go directly through WordPress is that in order to build a beautiful WordPress website that gives you all the functionality and flexibility that you need to get a quote unquote business plan. The business plan is about $40 a month directly through WordPress. And that's excessive for any small business. What you want to do is that if you go directly through one of these third-party resellers, such as HostGator, Bluehost, GoDaddy, SiteGround, Network Solutions, they all resell and they sell them for less than $10 a month. And you get the full business plan within that range without having to break your bank, because $40 a month adds up very, very quickly. When you get to Wix prices change. They changed their plans this year, so that's why their numbers are a bit off. It says $13 to $40. I know that those numbers have gone up a little bit. So for right now, if we use 13 and 40 as your mark, $13 is the basic plan that gives you just basic functionality, allows you to use the website. And then $40 is where you're getting into, and that's like the minimal, right? They still have $80 plans and such. If you have an e-commerce website, you're looking at those higher end plans to give you that functionality. For just a basic website, $13 to $40 per month is your budget. It gives you access to their booking calendar, chat features. They have quite a bit of robust things. Musicians use them because they can play their music, integrate with Spotify, things like that. Squarespace is about the same, $12 to $40, but they don't really go up into the hundreds the way that Wix can for some of the higher end plans, because you have to actually do some custom coding on that. For both Wix and Squarespace, your SSL certificate is included so that you don't have to consider that cost. Wix and Squarespace do provide you with domains. My recommendation is to get your domain through GoDaddy, HostGator, Bluehost, a third party who resells domain directly, and connect it to your Wix or Squarespace website. The reason being is that it becomes problematic to move the domain name away from either Wix or Squarespace. It can be done, but it can be a problem for you later down the line. In my case, after 3 years with Wix, tried to move it to WordPress. And if for any of you, if you tried to look me up in the past week, you got an error message because it took 7 days to transfer the domain. Meanwhile, I had no website. It's now fully transferred, but I'm still dealing with some of the issues of that transfer, which if I had known better 3 years ago, I would have just gotten it through GoDaddy and connected it wherever I needed to connect. For your email can cost you, again, anywhere from $199 to $19.99 a month. It really depends on what you're looking for and your customization and how many people on your plan. For your business, do you need admin, front office, back office, facilities? Sometimes you need multiple emails, and so that cost can go up. What I do suggest is that if you need more than one email for your business, regardless what it is, call whoever you're going to use for your hosting and see if they'll give you a bundle deal. Because if you go directly through the website, you'll probably pay more because you're going to just get the flat per mailbox, as they call it, per mailbox option. Whereas if you were to call them, I had a client who needed 6 mailboxes and the plan online was expensive. And so I told him to call GoDaddy, and GoDaddy was able to give him a deal. And he got, I think, 5 websites for the cost of what would have been 5 mailboxes for what would have been 3 mailboxes. So don't hesitate to call your providers and ask for those bundle deals. They'll do them most often than not. When you get into web development, that's my cost. It can range from $600 to $3,000 plus. It just depends on which developer you went with, what they're giving you as part of it. Oftentimes a developer will just do building. They don't do content writing. They don't do photography. They don't do any of those things. Some of them have access to stock photography. Some don't. Some offer integrations. Some don't. The only thing I will say on the web development is that you have to feel out your relationship with your web developer, because sometimes it's not a fit, right? If you're somebody that needs high touch and your web developer prefers if you're not, that's not going to work. Or if you need your web developer to just do it without a lot of input, again, you need to make sure that they're the type that can do that. And then other things to look for is just be careful that everything's not an add-on, right? Some web developers will say, okay, the base build is $600, but oh, you want one more page? That's another $100. You want plugins that do X, Y, and Z? That's this cost. You want this? That's that cost. And some of it is reasonable, and some of it can add up really fast. So you want to pay very close attention to what is it that comes as part of your web developer build? What will you get at the end of it? Will you be able to maintain it long-term by yourself? Are they going to build it with a drag and drop builder so you can understand it? Or are they going to build it with custom coding where you have to always call them? So just be mindful. Those are questions to ask. Again, it's an intuition thing. Unless your web developer comes recommended from someone else, it's kind of hard to feel that out sometimes. But you know, their costs really can vary. If you have an e-commerce website, you're looking closer to the $3,000 end of it, because you have to build the basic website, but then all the products have to get uploaded and configured. And that's where your cost starts to grow really fast. If you have a ton of products, you're going to end up with a ton of costs. So just keep that in mind for e-commerce websites. They're pricey for a reason. And then the last cost consideration is what's called content creation. There are folks that are what I would call higher level than me in marketing, where they help you figure out your brand strategy. They figure out who your audience is. They tell you from A to Z, what is it you need to say, how you need to say it, where you need to say it, and when you need to say it. They're called content creators or brand strategists. And those are folks that I tend to partner with. What happens is that clients will go to them to kind of figure out, they've got this big picture, what do they do? And then when they get to the build phase, I would work with the content creator to build a website that meets the client's needs and the content creator's vision together. So it becomes a partnership amongst the three of us, but I'm like through the content creator as opposed directly with the client. And so any questions on cost and budget considerations before we get into some design tips? Yes, I can try to send the slides out. My contact information will be they're on the bottom of every slide, except this one, sorry. But if not, sometimes email doesn't work, so I can try to send you a link so you can download them. Thank you, Gia. All right, so let's talk about some design tips. These are some of what I found to be pet peeves with websites that they don't function really well or they don't allow users to convert. In marketing, conversion basically means you landed on the website and you did something to follow through the relationship. Does that mean you contacted somebody, you made a purchase, you researched something, you answered a question? That's what a conversion is for a business. And so oftentimes you'll have people that say, my website sucks, it's not working. And so we start to look at why. So let's look at the basics of what a website is for in the first place. So your website is a decision-making tool. For all of you, I want you to just keep remembering that. It is a decision-making tool. Yes, it's about showcasing your business, but for your consumer and your client, it is a decision-making tool. People are searching the internet and they're looking for their product or their service before they buy it. Think about yourself. If you go to hire a plumber, if your friend, neighbor, or family member didn't say, use this guy, he's the best, you're looking them up on the internet, you're looking up their reviews, you're trying to figure out, is this the right person I even want coming into my house? If you're interested to know if they're bonded, you know, do they have bad ratings with the Better Business Bureau? There's lots of things you look for before you let a stranger into your house, especially when they're privately contracted. Same goes for a website for any small business, especially nonprofits. I use this analogy a lot, but I think it makes really good sense, is that a tree falls in the woods and no one heard it. Did it make a sound? The same goes for your business. If you have a business and it doesn't have a website, then no one knows you exist, or they don't believe you exist, right? And so again, you can have that website, but if it doesn't allow folks to make a decision, it's also falling into the same category. When you have your website, you're giving your business an opportunity to tell the consumers why they should trust you. You have testimonials on there. You're talking to the customer, not at the customer. You're explaining why your services are the best, why you stand out from your competition. And then you really are answering one key question. Can you solve the problem for your customer, right? If any of you have gone to my website recently or you were looking me up, you might be wanting to know, am I credible? Do I know what I'm talking about? Have I ever even built a website? Those are questions you might ask yourself before you say, okay, yeah, I'll listen to her teach a class, right? So same goes for any of your clients looking for your information on your website. So let's really talk specifically what your users are looking for. What they're looking for is immediate answers. So that means, does your website load fast? Is it well designed? And then can they get to what they want as fast as they can? You have between 5 and 10 seconds to convince someone to stay on your website. And this slide is a little old. I think the new statistic is between 3 and 5 seconds. 10 seconds is a lot of time. So if someone clicks the button in Google and they have to travel to your website, wait for the page to load, they're scanning the page for what they want, and they're either calling you or looking further into your services, or they're moving on, right? And while this says 5 to 10 seconds, the new statistics are showing closer to 3 to 5 seconds as we become more familiar in the smartphone, social media era, where our patient level is dropping, unfortunately. They want to know if you can solve their problem. And the thing is, your service, your product is ultimately a solution for their problem, right? If I use the plumber analogy, they want to know if you can fix the leaking dishwasher, if you can change the garbage disposal, if that's something that a plumber does and that service does, and that's your problem. And you want to write content aimed at the symptoms of their problem and inform them of their options. So for example, if I were to write blogs, my blogs could be around how to pick a web provider. I will be writing a blog actually on my experiences of moving my website from Wix to HostGator. So if anybody who has to do that exact same thing in the future, they don't have to go through what I went through. They can just follow the steps and have an easy transition. And so that's me solving a problem and writing content aimed at a symptom of the problem and giving them their option. I'm actually giving them the solution of their options. And then lastly, people are really looking for, is the website easy to use? And this is a very, very important thing. Can they use the layout? Oftentimes businesses can get too creative with their navigation tabs or menus across the top. People are looking for like 5 key pages: home, about us, contact us, services, products, FAQs. If you are a medical practice, they're probably looking for patient resources and forms. If you're a nonprofit, they're looking for donation information. Don't get overly creative. Your about us shouldn't be called what we believe. Your services shouldn't be called what we do. We're trained to use websites in a certain way. We're looking for things in a certain place. Don't put your contact information on your About Us page when it should be on the contact page. Something that's kind of a nuance is that your hours should always be on your contact page. So if you are a business that have very specific hours of service or an office location, all of that should be on your contact page. So you really want to think like your customer. This is the art to marketing anything, but especially when it comes to your website. If you think like a customer, you will always have a successful website. So what does that mean? Remove all the unnecessary distractions and focus on a simple design that's relevant to users. Especially important with Wix and when you're building yourself, sometimes I have to talk my clients out of features because they want everything that jumps up and it spins and pop-ups and those kind of things. But when we're in the smartphone era, pop-ups are not your friend anymore. Think about yourself when you go anywhere and a pop-up pops up on your cell phone and you can't get the X to click and you've accidentally gone now where you didn't want to go. You get frustrated. You don't want to create frustrations for your customers and your clients. So on the flip side of that, don't go overly simple at the same time. You can have beautiful web designs that are simple. Your logo should not be the most prominent thing on your website. Let me say that again. Your logo should not be the biggest thing on your website. Again, something I address probably daily is that when you're building a website, your logo should not take up half the screen, right? If you think about how much space you have on a computer screen, if your logo is taking up this much space, which is about the size of my head, that's about half the screen on my screen anyway. You might have a bigger monitor. Your logo should really be this big on the website. So, I mean, that's kind of nuanced, but we're talking about 1/6 of the screen, not 1/3, not 1/4, 1/6 is ideal. If your font's not legible, that means that you need a logo that's probably sized specifically for the website with a little bigger font within the dimensions. The reason being is that while you as a business, you want your logo to be recognizable, you want your business to be front and center, your consumers are looking for, again, a solution to a problem. Your logo isn't solving their problem. Your services are, your bio might be, your hours, your phone number, your email. Those are things they're looking for. Your logo, probably one of the fewest things they're looking for other than recognizing it. So again, 1/6 of your screen, excuse me, not 1/2. You want to use a big headline and place the most important information. Excuse me, it's tickling my throat. Let me mute myself for a second. So you want to use big headlines and place the most important information in the front and the center. And so a big headline for me would be, if you go to my new website, it says, advance your business with Edge Space Marketing. And then I have in big font the names of the services that I have, and in smaller font supporting information for that. And so you won't put your phone number and your email in big font, but you would put, you know, the name of your business, you know, serving customers in Stanford, Greenwich, Darien, whichever your location is, if that's very important, especially if you're a storefront or a physical brick and mortar business and your location is very important of driving traffic, those type of things. And then you really want to make it obvious where are your users supposed to go and what they're supposed to do next. That sounds kind of ethereal, but what that means is that they're called call to actions, they're buttons. So if the intro of your slide or the intro of your website says, welcome to Edge Space Marketing, and I want people to learn more about my business, I have a button that says learn more, and they can go to my About Us page. Or I could have it go to the services page, right? On my website, like as you go through, you'll see buttons are in different places for different purposes. I have a page called Portfolio where you can see examples of websites that I've built. And at the bottom of that page, I actually have a calculator where you can play with the different numbers that we just talked about by entering and seeing what happens. That's making it very clear that you're thinking about a website, you're thinking about hosting, and I know that most people are thinking about how much is it going to cost me and how do I figure that out? So I have a calculator to help them. So I've made it very clear where to go and how to get there. So here's a good example of how it can go wrong. For those of you who might still be familiar, this is a Venn diagram. On the left side of the Venn diagram, it says things on the front page of a university website. And on the right side of the Venn diagram, things people go to the site looking for. So let's start with what people are looking for. Students and families, and they're looking for the list of faculty phone numbers and emails, the address, application form, calendar, campus police, department courses, parking information, and a map. When I thought about my days in college, yes, those are all the things I was looking for. Said university was not thinking like the customer, and instead they have a slideshow, alumni, promotions for campus events, press releases, so on and so forth. And the only thing both things have in common is the full name of the school. So think about how far away this website got from what people really wanted. And if you know what your customers want, you will always have a winning website. And how do you figure that out? If you have an idea when you first start building your website, have some friends and family look at it. They'll give you the honest opinion about that doesn't make sense. I couldn't find what I was looking for. And when someone tells you they can't find what they're looking for, please listen to them. That's a big thing, because if your customers are literally saying, I can't find it, we have to fix that. Right? Oftentimes people want to ignore it and say, they don't know how to use my website. Well, that's probably part of the problem. No one should know how to use your website. Your website should intuitively let them know where to go. So now that we've talked about thinking like your customer and laying it out better, what are some of those things that people are always looking for that every website should have? And I'll preface this by saying, about 70% of every website that I've rebuilt, and not brand new builds, they're just rebuilt because they had been existing for many years and they needed a refresh, they were missing at least one of these components. I actually rebuilt a website that didn't have the phone number, email, or hours on it for a brick and mortar business. Imagine the frustration of the customers. They can't reach you and they have no idea when you're open. So let's start from the top. Contact information. Phone and email address should be in the header or the footer of every page. So the header is the information at the top where your logo is, where your navigation menu is. That repeats on every single page. And the footer, not every website has a footer. The capability is there for a footer, but not every website that you visit has it enabled. You should enable yours and have your contact information in the footer. If you are a physical business, you can put in a link to Google Maps. You can even put in the map. And that way people can actually click it, because we're all on our phones, and it'll go right to Google or even Siri Maps or Apple Maps and take you to where you have to go. Hours. Again, if you're a business where your hours are specific, where they have to visit you during certain hours, you're only available certain hours, make sure that they're available either in the footer and on your contact page. So again, if you have the footer enabled, please put it in your footer. If you do not, make sure you put it on your contact us page at the minimum. Services. It's interesting how many websites I see don't have the services section. If you are a service-based business, you want to list your services so people know what you do and include a brief 1 paragraph, 2 paragraph synopsis. Don't make it long. Don't make it an essay. A paragraph should really be 4 sentences. Very, very short, quick to read. Most people are skimming, especially if you're a business that offer a number of services, more than 6. It can get really long. So I just rebuilt a website for a dentist, and we had a hard time coming to a compromise on the content for the services page because the dental world is very technical and the service descriptions are very large. So the page ended up being very, very long and robust, but in a cumbersome way. So just keep an eye on that. If it seems hard to read, it probably is. Next up, we have FAQs. So if you have common questions, answer them in a frequently asked questions section. You can't go wrong with it. I mean, I should have an FAQ on my website. I just haven't had time to write them. But FAQs are very, very important for almost every website, regardless of who you are and what you do. You probably have a common set of questions that folks ask you. Now, what I will say is that if you have questions that are maybe less than 4, answer them in the content of your website, in paragraphs on your homepage or whatever page it belongs to. Unless you have more than 4, a whole page dedicated to FAQs may not make sense. If you're an e-commerce store, you're going to want FAQs and a policies page. Your policies page is where you're going to talk about refunds, cancellations, how transactions are processed, important things that matter for an e-commerce website. Other websites don't need a shop policy page, so that's just specific to e-commerce websites. Testimonials. When you're a brand new website or a brand new business, you probably don't have any testimonials, and that's okay. But if you've got a business that have been in existence for a while, you've done some pro bono work for some folks, and they can write you a testimonials, collect them and show them off. Now, you don't need to show off a ton. 20 seems to be about the maximum. You want to put them on a slider or a carousel so people can read through them. You really want to start to gather your testimonials on Google if you can, because that's where most people are going for reading reviews anyways. They're looking on Google as a beginning point, but keep them on your website as well. But 20 is a pretty high number for the amount of testimonials that you need. Pricing. Depending on your business, you may not need to list your pricing. So a perfect example is in my business, the pricing is fluid. It depends on the client and what they're looking for, and packages change, and so I don't have one set fixed package. That's my business model. There are other folks that have very specific fixed rate. If you're a gym, your pricing should be probably front and center, just because gyms are where people price shop. They're comparing rates, they're looking for their best value for dollar. So it's not necessarily the type of business that you want to hide your pricing. That's specific to a gym. The old marketing mentality was, if people want to know how much it costs, they will call you. No, they won't. If they can't find what they're looking for right away, they're not going to call you. So it just depends on the type of business. So if I see, going back to the gym example, if you see a gym that has like a all-inclusive type club and it doesn't have a price listed, the mindset is that I can't afford it. Think about the menus at a restaurant. If you go to a restaurant and the menu has no pricing on it, you're definitely looking at a very expensive dinner that hopefully you can afford, but you know that it's expensive because there's no prices on the menu. It's all market value. Whereas a menu with a fixed pricing, you'll know what your dinner is. It's a hard analogy, but hopefully that makes sense. And then one of the last few things we want to talk about are call to actions. If you're working with a web designer or a marketing person, you're going to hear this phrase often. What is the call to action? So the call to action is a button. It's a box. It's maybe something that's in a different color. So if you look at some of my earlier slides, when I shared the slides with you guys, you'll see that some of the text was in blue. And that was to make sure your eyes jumped at it and that you saw it and that it registered. If it was on a website, it was probably a call to action, to think differently. And so it's a button, a line of text, an image. It's meant to make your customers do something. Call you, go to another page, email you, find directions, fill out a form. Those are all types of call to actions. How does it work? You want to get their attention, collect some information, and follow up. So let me say that again. Your call to action has 3 purposes: get their attention, collect some information, and follow up. So a call to action for me would be a bunch of buttons that eventually get you to the contact us page where you fill out the form, and then I've gotten your information of what you're looking for, and then I call you, right? That's the follow through. And so my call to action works. And going back way to the beginning of the class, that was a conversion, right? I had a website conversion where they landed on my website, they got to the call to action, and they did something to contact me. So they've technically converted on the website. That doesn't mean it's a sale, but it's a website conversion. So some final thoughts around building your website. What does that design really look like? So here's a checklist to help you make sure that you've hit all your key elements. So here are your must-have items: your contact information, your hours, your services, your FAQs, your testimonials if you have them, pricing if it's applicable. Is your logo sized appropriately? Always make sure your logo is sized appropriately. And then make sure you answer these specific questions. Is my layout easy to follow? Do I have call to actions? Does my call to action make sense for my marketing strategy? So I'll give you an example. I'm working on a website for a hair salon that's going to be teaching an e-course to learn how to cut curly hair. But the call to action she originally gave me was sign up now. After going through the content, I realized they're not actually signing up for the course. They're signing up to be notified of when registration is opening. So the call to action was initially wrong because we were telling them to sign up and they thought they were signing up for class, when in actuality, they were signing up to be notified of when registration is opening. And that was a very important distinction. We've caught it before we've gone live, so that's not a problem. But imagine if we had gone live and how many people click the button thinking they're signing up for class and it's actually signing up for a newsletter to be told when class is open. Do I know what my customers are looking for? Again, if you have answered this question from the very beginning, you probably don't have to worry about it now, but as long as you know what you're solving for, again, the next question is it clear what problem I'm solving for? So a plumber is solving for leaky pipes, plugged drains, installing garbage disposals. Those are things that a plumber may do that someone could be looking for, and they're solving that problem. And then lastly, am I framing the benefits for the customer? So again, just goes right back to thinking like the customer, and am I telling them very clearly? You can even say, you benefit by, this benefits you, right? There's no reason to get creative if the sentencing makes sense or the grammar makes sense to explicitly say, you will benefit from X, Y, and Z. A chiropractor will honestly say, come see me, your back will feel better, right? Or your back will thank you later. Those are type of things a chiropractor might say, and very clearly framing that the benefit for someone to see them is they'll have a better feeling back. And then lastly, and most importantly, have someone unfamiliar with your business review your website. And they will honestly tell you if they can't find things, if something doesn't make sense. You want to make sure that somebody completely unfamiliar, not your business partner, not your web developer, just someone who hasn't seen it yet, play with it. They'll be the first ones to tell you if something's not quite right. So we've covered a lot in the last hour. We've left another 30 minutes for questions. If there's any questions that we haven't answered in the chat box, feel free to unmute yourself, or if you just want to throw them in the chat box, I can take questions now, and we can talk through anything or review anything that I might have gone through a little fast. Hold on, I'm going to stop sharing my screen for a second so I can see you all. All right, well, if we don't have any questions, a couple more minutes in case anyone's still typing. Nope. All right, well, thank you, everyone. I'm really, really glad that you all enjoyed class today. Thanks for staying till the end, late in the evening on a Wednesday. It's a good starting point. It'll save you costs in the long run. I like to have a deep consultation. So before I get into hiring, I have a million and 10 questions for you. What do you want? Where do you want it? How do you want it? How's it going to work? And we go through all of these questions. And sometimes I have people come to me that literally start at zero and go, I have no idea about hosting. I don't understand. Just tell me what you need me to do and I'll do it. And then the question always becomes then, do you want to be able to update it yourself later? And you need ease of that? Then we end up at Wix. Do you not care and budget is the factor? Then we end up on WordPress. And so, and if it's somewhere in the middle, then we go in the middle, right? Some people have come to me and said, I only know Squarespace and that's all I want. So that's where we go. So it all depends. Glad you guys enjoyed it. Any other questions? So the way to think about it, yeah. So here's the easiest way to think about it. If you go with Wix and excuse me, say that again. If you go with Wix or Squarespace, your hosting and your website are one and the same. There's no split. And the reason you're going to go with Wix or Squarespace is because you want the easy drag and drop interface. There's something very specific about it that you want. It's just easier for you. That's why most people go with them, or they have a very specific functionality that you want to use. But your hosting and your website are one and the exact same thing. Now, if you go with WordPress, you can go through WordPress and get it one and the same like this, just like the other two. But as I mentioned before, that's $40 a month and no one should be spending $40 for that. What you do instead is you go to HostGator, Bluehost, GoDaddy, Network Solutions, one of them, they're resellers. So what they're doing is they're hosting the WordPress right here, and then they're reselling it right here. So if this is your hosting, WordPress is inside of it. You're just going to do a WordPress installation. And then from then on, you're just building on WordPress. Well, sort of. Yes and no. You have to own the www dot first. And yes, if you own www dot, you've connected it to this WordPress, then yes, all of it's in here on this host. This was great. Thank you all for coming. This has been fun. And